Croatian military planners have been running classified war games for the past 3 years that all start with the same scenario: a rapid armored thrust across the Serbian border aimed at reaching Belgrade before international intervention can stop it. The simulations test everything from optimal invasion routes to air superiority requirements to logistics sustainability for a 72-hour campaign. These aren't hypothetical exercises for board staff officers. These are operational contingency plans for a conflict that both Zagreb and Belgrade know could erupt faster than anyone wants to admit. The question isn't whether Croatia has thought about invading Serbia. The question is whether Serbia could actually stop them if they tried. Welcome to Doctrine of War, where we analyze the military realities that determine who wins wars before they start. The Serbia-Croatia military balance represents one of the most dangerous potential flashpoints in Europe. Two former enemies with unresolved territorial disputes, ethnic tensions, and military capabilities that have been systematically modernized with exactly this scenario in mind. Today we're conducting a comprehensive analysis of whether Serbia possesses the military capabilities to defend against a full-scale Croatian invasion, examining everything from force structures and equipment to terrain advantages and alliance factors. And what you're about to discover is that the answer is far more complex and far more concerning than simple comparisons of tank numbers and defense budgets would suggest. The strategic geography, where Croatia would strike and why Serbia's terrain favors defense. Before we can assess whether Serbia could defend against Croatian invasion, we need to understand the geographic reality that would shape any conflict between these nations. The Serbia-Croatia border stretches roughly 240 kilometers, but not all of that border is equally vulnerable or equally important. Croatian military planning would focus on specific invasion corridors that offer the combination of favorable terrain for mechanized operations, strategic objectives worth capturing, and distances short enough to achieve decisive results before international intervention freezes the conflict. And understanding these corridors reveals both vulnerabilities in Serbian defenses and natural advantages that Serbia could exploit. The primary Croatian invasion route would almost certainly follow the path through Slavonia toward Belgrade from the west. This corridor offers relatively flat terrain suitable for armored operations, direct access toward the Serbian capital, and the potential to sever Serbia's northern regions from the rest of the country. The distance from the Croatian border to Belgrade is roughly 100 kilometers in a straight line, but the actual military distance accounting for terrain, obstacles, and defensive positions is significantly longer. Croatian forces would need to cross the Danube River, which represents a major natural obstacle requiring either seizure of intact bridges or time-consuming river crossing operations under fire. This gives Serbian forces a critical defensive advantage. The Danube isn't just a river, it's a natural defensive line that channels attacking forces into predictable crossing points where they become vulnerable to concentrated fires. The terrain in Vojvodina, Serbia's northern province, is largely flat agricultural land that would seem to favor Croatian armored thrusts. But flat terrain is a double-edged sword in modern warfare. While it allows rapid movement for attackers, it also provides excellent fields of fire for defenders and leaves attacking forces exposed to artillery and anti-tank weapons. Serbian defensive doctrine for this region emphasizes mobile defense, allowing Croatian forces to advance into killing zones where Serbian artillery, positioned in depth, can destroy advancing columns without exposing Serbian forces to direct combat. The key is trading space for time and casualties, allowing Croatian forces to advance until they're extended and vulnerable, then striking with concentrated firepower that destroys combat power before Croatian forces can consolidate positions. The southern border areas around Bosnia offer more rugged terrain that would complicate Croatian operations but also provide opportunities for limited offensives aimed at capturing specific territory rather than reaching Belgrade. These operations would be politically significant, reclaiming territory or creating security zones, but wouldn't represent existential threats to Serbia in the way that a drive on Belgrade would. Serbian defenses in these areas are less about stopping armored thrusts and more about denying Croatian forces easy victories and making any advance so costly that international pressure for ceasefire emerges before Croatia achieves significant gains. The eastern approaches from Croatia are constrained by geography and demographics. The terrain becomes more rugged, the distances longer, and the strategic objectives less obvious. Croatian planners wouldn't invest major forces in offensives from these directions because the terrain doesn't favor mechanized operations and the objectives don't justify the costs. This allows Serbia to economy of force these sectors, maintaining defensive presence sufficient to detect and delay any attacks but concentrating mobile reserves for employment in the critical western approaches where Croatia would actually stake the outcome of any conflict. Here's what Serbian defense planning recognizes that many outside analysts miss. Serbia doesn't need to defeat Croatian forces in pitched battles to successfully defend. Serbia needs to survive the initial assault, inflict sufficient casualties to undermine Croatian operational momentum, and hold on long enough for international intervention to impose a ceasefire. In other words, Serbian defensive success looks like avoiding collapse and preventing Croatia from achieving decisive operational objectives, not necessarily destroying Croatian military power. This defensive approach plays to Serbian strengths: interior lines that allow rapid reinforcement of threatened sectors, defensive terrain along key approaches, and the advantage of defending homeland territory where motivation and public support favor the defender. If you're starting to see why the geographic and strategic realities of this conflict favor Serbian defense more than raw force comparisons might suggest, you're discovering exactly the kind of analysis that Doctrine of War delivers. We examine not just what militaries have but how geography, strategy, and operational realities determine who actually wins. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're about to break down the actual military capabilities both sides would bring to this fight and why the force balance is far more even than Croatia's NATO membership might suggest. The terrain near Belgrade itself would be the decisive battleground if Croatian forces actually advanced that far. The approaches to the capital from the west require crossing multiple water obstacles, moving through urbanized areas that favor defenders, and operating at the extreme limit of supply lines while Serbian forces fight closer to their logistical bases. Urban warfare negates many of the advantages that modern militaries possess. Air superiority matters less when aircraft can't distinguish friend from foe in close urban combat. Armored vehicles become vulnerable to infantry anti-tank teams operating from buildings, and every block becomes a potential killing zone that consumes attacking forces. If Croatian forces reached Belgrade's outskirts, they would face the kind of urban combat that has destroyed attacking armies throughout history, from Stalingrad to Grozny to Mosul. Serbian forces defending their capital would have every advantage: knowledge of terrain, support from civilian population, short supply lines, and the kind of desperate motivation that comes from defending your nation's heart against invasion. The question of how long Serbia could sustain defense depends heavily on international response and how quickly ceasefire pressure emerges. Croatia's operational window would be measured in days, not weeks. Every day that Serbian forces hold and inflict casualties is a day closer to international intervention that freezes the conflict before Croatia achieves decisive victory. Serbian defensive strategy therefore emphasizes resilience, maintaining command and control when communications are disrupted, continuing operations when specific units are destroyed, preventing breakthrough that would allow Croatian exploitation, and generally making the campaign so costly and prolonged that continuing it becomes politically unsustainable for Croatia. This is attritional defense designed to outlast rather than outfight the attacker, and it's exactly the approach that smaller nations have successfully used throughout history against more powerful invaders. Force comparison and combat realities: who has what and what it means. Now let's conduct a realistic assessment of the military forces both sides would bring to this conflict, because understanding actual capabilities rather than just order of battle numbers determines whether Serbia could actually mount effective defense. The raw numbers tell part of the story, but the quality of forces, their readiness levels, their deployment locations, and their suitability for this specific scenario matter far more than simple force tallies. Croatia's military has been systematically modernized over the past decade with exactly this kind of conventional conflict in mind. The Croatian ground forces number approximately 7,000 active personnel with reserves that could expand the force significantly in mobilization. The most significant recent acquisition was the Leopard 2A4 and 2A5 main battle tanks from Germany, roughly 70 tanks that represent a genuine capability upgrade over previous Croatian armor. These are NATO standard tanks with advanced fire control, composite armor, and 120mm guns that can destroy any vehicle in Serbian inventory. Croatian mechanized infantry operates modern armored personnel carriers and has been trained extensively in combined arms operations that integrate armor, infantry, artillery, and air support into coordinated offensives. The Croatian Air Force's acquisition of 12 French Rafale multi-role fighters represents a game-changing capability that would give Croatia air superiority in any conflict with Serbia. The Rafale is a genuinely advanced fourth-generation plus fighter with sophisticated avionics, long-range missiles, precision strike capabilities, and electronic warfare systems that would overwhelm Serbian air defenses. Croatian pilots have been training intensively on these aircraft, and NATO integration means Croatian air operations would benefit from Allied intelligence, mission planning support, and potentially access to NATO command and control systems even if the alliance didn't directly participate in combat operations. Air superiority would allow Croatian forces to conduct reconnaissance, strike Serbian artillery positions, interdict supply lines, and generally create conditions where Serbian ground forces operate under constant threat from above. Croatian artillery has been upgraded with modern fire control systems, precision munitions, and the integration necessary for responsive fire support to advancing forces. The artillery force includes self-propelled howitzers, multiple rocket launchers, and counter-battery radar systems that would allow Croatian forces to suppress Serbian artillery while delivering accurate fires in support of ground operations. The quantity might not match Serbian artillery, but the quality and integration would provide Croatian forces with significant advantages in artillery duels that often determine outcomes of conventional conflicts. Serbia's ground forces are numerically larger than Croatia's, with approximately 13,000 active duty personnel and substantial reserves that could be mobilized relatively quickly. The main battle tank force consists primarily of modernized T-72 variants, not as advanced as Leopard 2s but still capable platforms with effective main guns and improved fire control systems. The key question isn't whether individual T-72s can fight Leopard 2s. In the right circumstances with good tactics they absolutely can, but whether Serbian tank crews are trained to the same standards as Croatian crews and whether Serbian tanks would be employed in ways that negate Croatian advantages. Serbian doctrine emphasizes defensive employment where tanks operate from prepared positions, ambush advancing enemies, and use terrain to offset technological disadvantages. This is sound doctrine that maximizes Serbian strengths, but executing it requires discipline and coordination that aren't guaranteed in the chaos of actual combat. Serbian artillery represents one of the country's most significant military assets and would be absolutely critical in any defensive campaign. Serbia operates extensive tube artillery, multiple rocket launchers including upgraded Soviet-era systems, and domestically produced artillery systems. The quantity of Serbian artillery exceeds Croatian capabilities, and Serbian doctrine emphasizes massed fires concentrated on breakthrough points to destroy attacking forces. The ability to rapidly mass artillery fires on Croatian crossing points, assembly areas, and advancing columns would be essential for Serbian defensive success. The question is whether Serbian artillery can survive Croatian air strikes and counter-battery fires long enough to deliver the concentrated fires that defensive doctrine requires. The Serbian Air Force represents the most significant capability gap compared to Croatian forces. Serbia operates a small fleet of MiG-29 fighters, capable aircraft but numerically insufficient and technologically outmatched by Croatian Rafales. Serbian pilots are professional and competent, but they would be fighting outnumbered against more advanced aircraft flown by NATO-trained pilots with superior sensors and weapons. Realistic Serbian air planning would focus on survival rather than air superiority, dispersing aircraft to avoid destruction on the ground, conducting limited defensive operations when opportunities present, and preserving combat power for critical moments rather than wasting it in unwinnable air battles. The loss of air superiority is operationally significant but not necessarily decisive if Serbian ground forces can operate effectively despite enemy air superiority, which armies have done throughout history through dispersion, camouflage, and operating at night or in weather conditions that limit air operations. Serbian air defense represents a more promising capability that could partially offset Croatian air superiority. Serbia has invested in integrated air defense systems including modernized Soviet-era SAMs, Russian Panzer S-1 short-range systems, and potentially more advanced systems that haven't been publicly confirmed. Serbian air defense doctrine, refined through the experience of surviving 78 days of NATO bombing in 1999, emphasizes mobility, deception, and integrated operations where multiple systems support each other. The goal isn't to prevent Croatian air operations entirely, that's unrealistic given the capability gap, but to make Croatian air operations costly and risky enough that they can't operate with impunity. Every Croatian aircraft shot down is one fewer threat to Serbian ground forces and represents significant cost that might influence Croatian operational decisions and international political responses. The special forces and infantry comparison is more balanced than the armor and air comparisons. Serbian special forces are combat experienced, well-trained, and capable of operations ranging from reconnaissance to direct action. Croatian special forces are similarly professional and have benefited from NATO training and equipment. In any invasion scenario, both sides would employ special forces for critical missions. Croatian forces might conduct raids to destroy air defenses or seize river crossings, while Serbian forces would conduct raids against Croatian logistics and command posts while providing reconnaissance that guides defensive operations. The quality of infantry on both sides is sufficient that outcomes would depend more on operational employment and leadership than on inherent capability advantages. The logistics and sustainability comparison favors Serbia in a defensive campaign. Serbian forces would be operating from interior lines with short supply chains, fighting on home territory where civilian infrastructure supports military operations, and defending positions that have been prepared and stockpiled. Croatian forces would be conducting offensive operations at increasing distances from their bases, dependent on supply lines that Serbian forces would target, and operating in potentially hostile territory where local populations might provide intelligence to Serbian forces and deny support to Croatian forces. Modern militaries consume enormous quantities of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and food. Sustaining offensive operations requires logistics capabilities that are far more demanding than defensive operations. Every kilometer Croatian forces advance increases their logistics burden and creates vulnerabilities that Serbian forces can exploit. The mobilization and reserve dynamics also favor Serbia. Serbian reserves have recent experience with military service, maintain some level of readiness through periodic training, and could be mobilized to expand Serbian forces significantly if warning time allowed. Croatian reserves exist but haven't been as extensively maintained or exercised. In a surprise attack scenario, this might not matter because the war could be decided before reserves mobilize. But in a scenario with rising tensions and warning time, Serbian ability to mobilize and expand forces could alter the force balance significantly and provide the depth necessary to absorb Croatian attacks while maintaining reserves for counterattacks. Here's the brutal reality that determines whether Serbia could defend against Croatian invasion. It depends entirely on what defend successfully means and what assumptions you make about conflict duration, international response, and Croatian war aims. If Croatian forces launched a surprise attack with full mobilization, achieved complete air superiority, and drove rapidly toward limited objectives before Serbian forces could fully mobilize, Croatia could achieve significant territorial gains. But sustaining those gains, advancing beyond initial objectives, and actually defeating Serbian military power rather than just seizing territory would be far more difficult. Serbian forces don't need to win decisive battles. They need to survive, inflict casualties, and hold long enough for international pressure to stop the fighting before Croatia achieves irreversible victory. The NATO factor creates enormous uncertainty in any assessment. Croatia is a NATO member, but Article 5 collective defense obligations only apply to defensive scenarios where NATO territory is attacked. An offensive Croatian invasion of Serbia wouldn't trigger Article 5 protections, and it's questionable whether NATO allies would provide direct military support for an aggressive war that most alliance members would view as destabilizing and contrary to their interests. But Croatia would still benefit from NATO training, potentially access to NATO intelligence and planning support, and the implicit knowledge that Serbian forces couldn't strike Croatian territory too deeply without risking that NATO allies would view it as threatening alliance members. This creates an asymmetry where Croatia could potentially launch attacks from bases that Serbian forces can't effectively strike without escalating to a NATO confrontation. The most likely outcome of any Serbia-Croatia conflict isn't decisive victory for either side but rather a bloody, inconclusive campaign that kills thousands, destroys billions in infrastructure and equipment, and ends in an internationally imposed ceasefire that freezes the conflict before either side achieves their maximum objectives. In that scenario, Serbian defensive success would be measured not by destroying Croatian military power but by preventing loss of vital territory, maintaining governmental control, and avoiding collapse that would allow Croatia to dictate terms. And based on the force comparison, geography, and strategic dynamics we've analyzed, Serbia possesses sufficient capability to mount that kind of defense even against NATO-modernized Croatian forces. That's the analysis for today on Doctrine of War. If this realistic assessment of Serbia-Croatia military balance gave you a new perspective on Balkan security and what modern defensive warfare actually requires, let us know in the comments. Do you think Serbia could successfully defend against Croatian invasion? What factors would be most decisive in determining outcomes? And if you want more analysis of regional military balances, force comparisons, and the real capabilities that determine who wins wars, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're covering the potential conflicts that could explode tomorrow based on the military realities that exist today. The Serbia-Croatia question isn't academic speculation. It's a genuine possibility that military planners in both countries prepare for constantly. The unresolved tensions from the 1990s wars, the competing nationalisms, the disputed territories, and the military capabilities both sides maintain all create conditions where conflict could erupt far faster than the international community could prevent. Whether Serbia could defend isn't just about tanks and aircraft, it's about terrain, strategy, national will, and the operational realities of modern warfare. And based on everything we've analyzed, Serbia possesses real defensive capabilities that would make any Croatian invasion far more difficult and costly than simple force comparisons might suggest. Until next time, stay strategic.